When I walked into the restaurant and saw the table set for two with his favorite flowers and someone else's name folded into the place card, I knew the surprise wasn't meant for me. The hostess smiled too brightly, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. Candles flickered along the windows, and the low hum of a piano drifted through the room. I stood there holding my purse with both hands, feeling foolish in the blue dress I'd ironed twice because my mother-in-law had said, "Wear something special. This night is important." Important. That word echoed as I scanned the room again, certain I'd misunderstood something simple. 30 years of marriage had taught me that misunderstandings happened. Misplaced keys, wrong dates, missed calls. But this wasn't a small thing. This was my anniversary. Or at least I thought it was. The hostess cleared her throat. "Ma'am, are you joining the party?" She asked gently. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed a stone. I'm waiting for my husband," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. She nodded and gestured toward the table. "They'll be here shortly." They, not he. I sat down anyway. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or hope. The kind that keeps you seated even when your heart is already standing up to leave Dot as I waited. I noticed the details, the way the silverware caught the candlelight, the soft clink of glasses from nearby tables, the smell of garlic and butter that always reminded me of Sunday dinners. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to remind myself that surprises, by their nature, look strange before they make sense, but nothing made sense anymore. Before all this, my life was ordinary in the best way, predictable, comfortable. I had been married to Daniel for 3 decades, and in that time, we built a rhythm that felt like a well-worn song. He woke before dawn, always humming under his breath as he shaved. I liked to linger in bed, listening to the house come alive, the kettle whistling, the floorboards creaking under his steps. We weren't flashy people. Our love lived in small things, the way he warmed my coffee mug before pouring, the way I folded his socks just so, even though he swore he didn't care. We argued, of course, about money, about the kids, about whether the thermostat was too high. But the arguments always ended the same way, with a sigh, an apology, and the quiet understanding that neither of us was going anywhere, or so I believed. Our children were grown now. The house felt bigger, quieter. I filled my days with part-time work at the library and volunteering at church. Daniel had retired the year before, and he was still learning how to sit still. He took up woodworking, leaving a trail of sawdust through the garage. Some days he'd surprise me with lunch or insist on driving me to errands. I could easily do myself. It felt like a second honeymoon. In a way. Slower, softer Dot than there was Margaret, my mother-in-law. Margaret had always been involved. The kind of woman who rearranged your kitchen drawers because it just makes more sense this way, and who remembered every slight from the past 50 years as if it happened yesterday. She loved her son fiercely, sometimes in ways that felt less like love and more like possession. Still, we'd found a truce over the years. I respected her place in Daniel's life, and she tolerated mine. On good days, we even laughed together, usually over old family stories she'd told 100 times before Dot. So when Margaret called me 3 weeks before our anniversary, her voice unusually sweet, I didn't think twice. "I'm planning something special for you and Daniel," she said. "A surprise. Don't ask questions, just trust me." I laughed. "You know, I don't like surprises." "That's because no one's ever done it right," she replied. "This time will be different." There was something in her tone tight, almost rehearsed, but I brushed it off. Margaret was dramatic by nature. Always had been. Over the next few weeks, she became strangely attentive. She asked about my favorite colors, my schedule, even my dress size. She insisted on taking Daniel out for errands more often, waving me off with a brisk, Girl time isn't for you today. Daniel, for his part, seemed distracted. Not secretive exactly, but distant. He checked his phone more often, took calls in the other room. When I asked what Margaret was up to, he shrugged. You know my mother, he said. She likes to feel important. I wanted to believe that was all it was. The night of our anniversary, Margaret called again. Be ready by 6, she said. I've arranged everything. What do you mean everything? I asked. Just be ready, she repeated, and hung up before I could ask more. Daniel kissed my cheek before leaving the house. I'll see you there, he said, eyes flicking away from mine. Where's there? I choked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'll see. I stood in the doorway watching his car pull away, a small knot forming in my stomach. I told myself I was being silly. After 30 years, a little mystery shouldn't scare me, but as I sat alone in the quiet house, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath my feet. And now, sitting at that candlelit table, staring at a place card that didn't bear my name, I understood why the piano music swelled, and the hostess glanced toward the entrance again. My hands trembled as I folded them in my lap. Whatever Margaret had planned, it wasn't for me. Not at all. Asterisk, I sat there longer than I should have. Long enough for the candle to burn low and for the hostess to check on me twice more, her smile growing more uncertain each time. Long enough for my mind to run through every possible explanation that didn't end in heartbreak. Maybe Margaret had made a mistake with the place cards. Maybe there was another table. Maybe Daniel was running late. 30 years doesn't just disappear in an evening. It doesn't vanish between the breadbasket and the wine list stop, but then I saw her. Margaret swept into the restaurant like she owned the place. Her pearls catching the light, her lips painted a shade too bright for dinner. She didn't look surprised to see me. Not even a flicker. Instead, her eyes narrowed just enough to tell me this wasn't part of the plan. Oh, she said, stopping short. You're already here. My throat tightened. You told me to be. She glanced at the table, then back at me, as if measuring how much I'd already figured out. Well, she said lightly, I suppose you can sit for a moment. Daniel will be here soon. I wanted to ask her whose name was on the place card. I wanted to ask why the reservation was for 2 and not 3. But the word stuck. Years of learning how to keep the peace had trained me well. Margaret slid into the chair across from me, smoothing her napkin. She didn't look at the place card either. This is a lovely restaurant, she said. Very tasteful. I thought it was time for something meaningful. My pulse thudded in my ears. Meaningful for who? She smiled then, a thin, careful thing. For family. Before I could respond, the door opened again. Daniel walked in, his shoulders tense, his eyes scanning the room. When he saw me, he stopped, just like that, as if he'd run into a wall. For a moment, none of us moved. The music played on. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of champagne flutes, the glasses chiming softly. Lena, Daniel said finally. My name sounded strange in his mouth. What are you doing here? The question hit harder than any accusation could have. I was invited, I said. By your mother? Margaret shifted in her seat. Now, Daniel, don't start. She was bound to find out sooner or later. Find out what? Daniel's face drained of color. He looked at his mother, then back at me. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Asterisk. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. He muttered. The waiter appeared, cheerful and oblivious. Good evening. Are we ready to order drinks? No, Daniel said sharply. Then softer to me, Lena, can we talk outside? I stood on unsteady legs. Margaret didn't move to follow us. She simply watched, her expression unreadable. Outside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Cars passed by, their headlights blurring together. Daniel rubbed his face, his voice low. I didn't want you to find out this way. My heart pounded. Find out what, Daniel? He looked at me then, really looked, and something like shame flickered across his features. My mother planned tonight, he said. But it wasn't our anniversary dinner. The words felt heavy, slow to sink in. Then what was it? He hesitated. Too long. Say it, I whispered. He swallowed. It was supposed to be a celebration. For me. For you and who? I asked, my voice barely there. He closed his eyes. For me and someone else. The street seemed to tilt. I reached out, studying myself against the brick wall. Someone else, I repeated. You're going to have to do better than that. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. A car horn blared nearby, sharp and sudden. My mother thinks, he began slowly, that it's time I start over. I stared at him. Start over from what? From us, he said. The words landed like a slap. For how long? I asked, how long have you been planning this? He shook his head quickly. I wasn't planning it. Not like this. It just happened. And then she got involved. Of course she did. Who's she? I asked. He hesitated again. Her name is Claire. I didn't know her. Or maybe I did. In that moment, it felt like every woman Daniel had ever smiled at could be her. She works with your mother, he added, as if that explained anything. My laugh came out sharp and brittle. So Margaret arranged my husband's anniversary dinner with his new partner, I said. That's what you're telling me. She thought it would be kinder this way. He said weakly. Kinder. The word burned. Inside the restaurant, laughter floated out, warm and carefree. I imagined Margaret sitting there, pleased with herself, convinced she was doing what was best for her son. What about me? I asked, what was kind about this for me? Daniel reached for my hand. I pulled away. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said, and yet here we are. We stood in silence, the weight of 30 years pressing down between us. Finally, I straightened. I'm not going back in there, I said. You can explain to your mother why? He nodded, eyes downcast. I'll come home later. I turned and walked away before he could say anything else. I didn't look back. That night, I drove home alone, the city lights blurring through my tears. The house was dark and quiet when I unlocked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my blue dress, and listened to the clock tick on the wall. 30 years. Reduced to a surprise dinner that wasn't meant for me, and the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how carefully it had all been planned, how many conversations had happened without me, how many decisions had been made as if I were already gone. I lay down without changing, staring at the ceiling, and wondered when my life had stopped being mine. Daniel didn't come home that night. I knew he wouldn't. Still, some small foolish part of me listened for his car in the driveway, for the familiar click of the lock, for the soft clearing of his throat before he spoke my name. None of it came. The house stayed silent, heavy with the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I didn't cry right away. I folded the blue dress carefully and laid it over the back of the chair, the way I always did with clothes I wasn't ready to wash. I washed my face, brushed my teeth, went through the motions like a woman rehearsing normalcy for an audience that wasn't there. Only when I crawled into bed, my side cold. His untouched, did the tears finally come? They weren't dramatic. They slipped out slowly, soaking into the pillow. My chest aching with each shallow breath, I kept seeing Margaret's face, calm, certain, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. By morning, my eyes were swollen and my head throbbed. I made coffee out of habit, poured 2 cups before realizing my mistake. I dumped one down the sink, watching the dark liquid disappear. Thinking how easily things vanished when you weren't paying attention. Daniel texted just before noon. We need to talk. I'll come by later. No apology. No explanation. Just a statement like a doctor delivering bad news. I didn't respond. Instead, I went for a walk. The air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath my shoes. Neighbors waved, asked how my anniversary dinner had been. I smiled and said, lovely, because sometimes the truth feels too heavy to carry in public. When I got back, Margaret's car was already in the driveway. She was sitting at my kitchen table like she belonged there, her purse placed neatly beside her chair. She'd brought pastries, my favorite kind, the ones filled with almond paste as if sugar could soften betrayal. I thought you might need company, she said, standing to greet me. I didn't hug her. I didn't sit down. You planned it, I said. All of it. She sighed as if tired of pretending. I planned what needed to be done. For whom? I asked. For Daniel, she replied without hesitation. He's been unhappy for a long time. That's funny, I said. He never mentioned it to me. She waved a hand dismissively. Men don't always know how to articulate their feelings. That's where a mother comes in. I felt something harden inside my chest. You don't get to decide my marriage is over. She met my gaze, unflinching. Someone had to. I sat down then, my legs suddenly weak. How long? I asked quietly. A year, she said. Maybe a little more. A year, holidays, birthdays, family dinners where she looked me in the eye and asked me to pass the salt. And Claire? I asked, Margaret's lips curved into a small smile. She's lovely, smart, appreciates Daniel in ways you stopped doing years ago. The cruelty of it took my breath away. You mean she listens to his stories about the past? Laughs at his jokes you've heard 100 times? Margaret leaned forward. She makes him feel young. I laughed then, a low, broken sound. And I make him feel old. She didn't deny it. You invited me to that dinner knowing what it was, I said. Why? Her eyes flickered just for a moment. Because I wanted you to see it was over, clean, decisive. There was nothing clean about that, I said. It was humiliating. She shrugged. Sometimes pain is necessary. I stood up, my hands trembling. Get out, now, Lena. Get out of my house. She gathered her purse slowly, dignity intact. At the door, she paused. You'll thank me one day, she said. This way you can move on. After she left, I locked the door and slid down against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I stayed there a long time, staring at the floor, feeling something shift inside me, not just grief, but anger. A quiet, steady kind. Daniel came by that evening. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. I never meant for her to hurt you, he said, standing awkwardly in the living room. You let her? I replied. He nodded. I didn't know how to stop it. You didn't try. We sat across from each other, the space between us filled with years of shared life now turning brittle. I want a divorce, he said finally. I'd known it was coming. Still, the word felt final in a way nothing else had. Is that what you want? I asked. Or what your mother wants? He hesitated. That was answer enough. I'll stay with her for now, he added quietly. Just until things settle. With Claire, I said. Yes. I closed my eyes. Take what you need, I said. But leave your key. He did that after he left. I walked through the house, touching familiar things, the arm of the couch, the picture frames, the dent in the wall from when the kids were young and careless. I realized then how much of my life had been built around accommodating others, smoothing edges, keeping peace. That night, I slept for the first time in days. Not well, but enough. And when I woke up, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to disappear quietly from my own life. Asterisk. The morning after Daniel asked for a divorce, I woke with a strange clarity. The grief was still there, settled deep in my chest, like sediment, but layered over it was something steadier. Resolve, maybe, or self-respect. Finally waking up after years of being polite, I made my bed. I opened the curtains. I fed the cat. Small things, but deliberate. I needed to remind myself that I still ran my own days. By noon, I had called a lawyer. Her name was Judith, and she had a calm voice that didn't rush me when my words stumbled. She asked questions I hadn't yet thought to ask about assets, about timelines, about whether Daniel had moved money or property. No, I said. At least, I don't think so. Thinking isn't enough, she replied gently. We'll verify. That afternoon, I gathered documents. Bank statements, deeds, retirement accounts. 30 years of shared life reduced to paper and numbers. I discovered things I hadn't known, accounts opened recently, small transfers I'd never questioned because I trusted him. Trust has a way of blinding you. Asterisk as the days passed. Daniel stayed away. Margaret, however, did not. She began calling once, twice, then more, leaving messages that sounded almost reasonable. I just want to make sure you're all right. You don't have to do this the hard way. Daniel's confused. You should talk to him. I didn't respond. Instead, I talked to my sister, Ruth. She listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening with every detail. She planned it, Ruth said finally. Like an event? Yes. That's not concern. That's control. Ruth helped me pack up Daniel's things quietly, methodically. Shirts folded into boxes. Shoes lined up. The scent of his cologne lingered, sharp and familiar. I didn't cry. I just worked. When Daniel came to collect his belongings, I wasn't home. I left a note on the table. Please coordinate future communication through my lawyer. It felt cold. Necessary. A week later, I attended church alone for the first time in decades. I sat in the same pew, hands folded, listening to hymns that suddenly sounded different, less comforting, more questioning. After the service, whispers followed me. Not cruel, exactly, curious. I heard Daniel moved out. Such a shame after all these years. Margaret stood near the coffee table, holding court. When she saw me, she stiffened. I met her eyes and didn't look away. That was when I realized something important. She had expected me to fold, to retreat quietly, embarrassed, grateful even for being handled with such care. She hadn't planned for me to stand. The turning point came. 2 weeks later, Judith called me into her office. Papers spread neatly across the desk. Daniel has been preparing for this longer than he admitted, she said. With assistance. Margaret, I said. Judith nodded. She co-signed a loan, helped facilitate the transfer of a shared investment account into a trust under his name. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed steady. Is it legal? Barely, Judith said. Incontestable. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to destroy him. I know, she said. But you also don't have to be destroyed. We filed motions. Requests, everything clean, documented, above board. Daniel called that night, his voice tight. You didn't have to do this. I did, I replied. You made decisions without me. I'm simply responding. This is going to get ugly. It already did, I said. The real confrontation happened at mediation. Margaret arrived with Daniel. Her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. Claire wasn't there. I suspected that was deliberate. Margaret spoke more than Daniel did. She's being unreasonable, she said to the mediator. Daniel deserves a fresh start. I looked at her then, really looked. Not as my mother-in-law, not as some looming authority, but as a woman afraid of losing control. I am not an obstacle to be removed, I said calmly. I am a person who is deceived. The room went quiet. For the first time, Margaret had nothing to say. The settlement took months. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just careful negotiation and firm boundaries. I kept the house. Daniel kept his pride, mostly intact. Margaret lost something she never expected to her influence. Word spread, slowly but surely. Not in gossip, but in facts. People learned how the dinner had been planned, how I'd been invited under false pretenses, how accounts had been shifted quietly without my knowledge. Margaret's tone changed after that. Less certainty, more restraint. She stopped calling. When the divorce was finalized, Daniel asked to meet one last time. We sat on a park bench. Autumn leaves scattered at our feet. I never meant for it to end like this, he said. Endings rarely match intentions, I replied. I hope you find happiness, he said. I nodded. I already have. He looked surprised. So was I. After the divorce papers were signed and the last envelope was mailed, I expected to feel empty. That's what everyone warned me about, that strange quiet after the storm, when there's nothing left to fight for and nowhere left to aim your anger. But what I felt instead was space. Like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't realize had grown stale. The house was still the same, but it belonged to me in a way it never had before. I moved furniture without asking anyone's opinion. I painted the guest room a soft green Daniel had always hated. I let the radio play while I cooked, even if I didn't know the words. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slips in quietly, barefoot, while you're busy surviving. Margaret didn't come around anymore. At church, she kept her distance, nodding politely but never approaching. People noticed. They always do. The woman who once orchestrated everything now sat alone most Sundays. Her conversations shorter, her authority diminished. I didn't take pleasure in it. But I didn't rush to comfort her either. One afternoon, a mutual friend stopped by the library where I worked. You handled everything with such grace, she said softly. I don't know how you did it. I smiled, sliding a book across the counter. Grace isn't something you feel, I said. It's something you choose when anger would be easier. That night, I cooked dinner just for myself. Nothing fancy: roasted chicken, vegetables, a glass of wine. I ate at the kitchen table, sunlight fading through the window, and realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to come home. The loneliness still visited sometimes, usually late at night when memories crept in uninvited. The way Daniel used to tap his fork against his plate when he was thinking. The way Margaret's voice filled the room when she was certain she was right. But the memories, no. Longer rolled me. Then came the call I didn't expect. It was Claire. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I considered hanging up. Instead, I said, go on. I didn't know, she said quickly. Not everything. Your mother-in-law made it sound different. I closed my eyes. She's very good at that. Claire sighed. Daniel and I aren't together anymore. That surprised me. I felt no triumph, only a quiet confirmation of something I'd already suspected. He realized too late what he gave up, she continued. And I realized I didn't want to build something on someone else's ruins. I appreciated her honesty. It didn't heal anything, but it settled a question I'd stopped asking. Thank you for telling me, I said. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Not because I was shaken, but because I wasn't. That was when I knew I was healing. A month later, Margaret approached me after church. I owe you an apology, she said stiffly. I studied her face, the lines deeper now, the confidence dulled. For what? For how things were handled, she said. I thought I was protecting my son. And in doing so, I replied gently, you forgot he wasn't a boy anymore. She nodded once. I misjudged you? Yes, I said. You did. She waited, perhaps expecting forgiveness on demand. I offered something quieter instead. I'm willing to be civil, I said. But our relationship will never be what it was. She accepted that with a tight nod and walked away. That night, I slept soundly, life didn't transform overnight. I still worked my shifts, still folded laundry, still had days when grief brushed past me like an old ache before the rain. But I also laughed more, called friends I hadn't spoken to in years, took a short trip by myself just because I could. I learned that dignity doesn't mean staying silent. It means knowing when to speak and when to walk away. And sometimes the greatest surprise isn't betrayal. It's discovering how strong you are when everything familiar falls away. Asterisk winter came gently that year, without drama. The kind that dusts the mornings with frost and turns breath into something you can see. Something that reminds you you're still here. I decorated the house differently for the holidays. Fewer ornaments, fewer expectations. I put up the old wooden nativity my children had chipped when they were small. Not because it was perfect, but because it told the truth about us worn. A little broken, still standing. On Christmas morning, I made coffee and sat by the window watching the street wake up. Families came and went, cars packed with wrapped boxes and laughter. For the first time, I didn't feel left behind by it all. I felt detached. Peacefully, so. Daniel sent a card. No return address, just his handwriting still neat, still careful. I hope you're well. I'm sorry for how things ended. I folded it once and placed it in a drawer. Some apologies come too late to change anything, but early enough to be acknowledged without reopening wounds. Margaret sent nothing. And that was all right. Spring brought new routines. I joined a walking group, women my age, each with her own quiet story. We talked about books, gardens, aches that came with weather changes. Not once did I have to explain myself. One morning, as we paused by the lake, a woman named Evelyn said, "You walk like someone who's learned something hard." Asterisk, I smiled. "I have. What was it?" She asked. "That love doesn't excuse erasure," I said. "And loyalty doesn't mean silence." She nodded, as if filing that away for her own life. The anniversary of that night came and went without ceremony. I didn't mark it. Didn't avoid it either. It was just another date on the calendar now. Stripped of its power, I spent that evening cooking a new recipe, something bold, unfamiliar. I burned the first batch and laughed out loud when the smoke alarm went off. The sound startled me with how normal it felt. Later, as I washed the dishes, I thought about that restaurant. The candles. The place card with someone else's name, I realized. Then that the betrayal hadn't begun. It began the moment people decided my presence was optional in my own life, and it ended the moment I refused to accept that. Margaret and I crossed paths occasionally after that, at church, at community events. Our exchanges were polite, distant. She no longer tried to steer conversations or correct my choices. I suspect she finally understood that control, once lost, rarely returns. I didn't need her remorse to heal. I didn't need Daniel's regret either. What I needed, I had already reclaimed: my voice. On a quiet evening months later, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the cicadas hum. The house behind me felt warm, settled, mine. I thought about the woman I'd been before, the one who smoothed edges, who trusted silence more than truth. I didn't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew, but I was no longer her. I had learned that surprises reveal more than intentions. They reveal who thinks they have the right to decide your place. And if you let them, they will.